Thanks again for joining us this morning. My name is Laura Konsorada. I'm the Marketing Director at DevFacto Technologies in Edmonton, Alberta, and we are the creators of Sparrow Modern Workplace. I'm joined today by Sean Williams, who's the VP of True Digital, and we are here today to present what to measure, identifying standards for internal communications measurement.
Great, thanks so much, Laura, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in this wonderful, wonderful world. As Laura says, I'm Sean Williams, and I work for True Digital Communications, and I'm giving this presentation on standards for internal comm measurement in hopes that I can convince you over the course of the next few minutes that you need to be doing more and better measurement. I guess you could say I'm a measurement evangelist when it comes to these things. More on that here as we go along. So the agenda is on the screen now. We'll spend a little bit of time getting to know each other. Here in just a moment, I'll ask Laura to put our first poll question up. We're going to go through and define measurement because that tends to be one of the big questions that people have is what are we actually talking about when we talk measurement, and how does that differ from research and evaluation. We'll go through the internal communication measurement standards that I've had the honor of leading a task force for the Institute for Public Relations Measurement Commission, based here in the States, international task force to decide on what it is we should be measuring and to some degree how to measure it. And then we'll also have a bit of discussion about applying the standards to the things that you do every day. So just a little bit about True Digital Communications. We're a full service digital first agency. We cut our teeth on the digital side when nobody else was doing it. And as a result, over the course of the last 8-9 years, we've had a front row seat to all of the changes in this industry. We're a small agency. We got about 12 associates. We have some cool space, and you can see in the upper left-hand corner of the slide, just a little bit about our space. It's kind of fun. You'll see some of those as we go through that illustrate our people and the place where we work, which is kind of fun. And as we say, if you want to like get on Twitter and like make fun of me, then my handle is @comammo, and you're welcome to tweet through there just so we can get a feel for who actually pays attention to these sorts of bullets. My resume is really long, which means that I'm increasingly aged, even though I look at this picture and I wonder who that guy is, because inside I'm still the 39-year-old precocious brat, not the eminence grise. I've worked for big companies. I've worked for small companies. I have been active for the last 7 years in the PRSA, Employee Communications Professional Interest section. I am a member of the IPR Measurement Commission for 15 years, and as I say, I led the task force on internal communication measurement standards. And the biggest accomplishment so far this year is that I was inducted just a couple of months ago into the PR News Measurement Hall of Fame. 2019 class for my work in internal comm measurement, which is kind of funny because I always wanted to be a Hall of Famer, but I was thinking more in terms of Cooperstown, New York, Canton, Ohio. That's the Hall of Fame I thought I might be in. But hey, I'll take this one. Nobody can take away from me that I am the Hall of Famers. You'll be glad to know as we go on to our challenges slide. You'll be glad to know that you're not alone. The challenges that I've heard most often, and I've given this presentation about 5 times in the last couple of months. Number one is the dealing with expense and the deficit of time that people have. Now, the second is, we're being asked to perform tactical outputs every day, and given the incredibly shrinking size of staffs particularly in internal comm, we're being asked to do a lot more than we ever have before. Back when I was leading internal communications at Goodyear, back before the dawn of time, was going on about 10 years ago, I had 2 half-time interns and a full-time person who reported to me. And now the person who is in my role at Goodyear has 1 person. So we've already seen a tremendous reduction, and that has really affected the ability to think long-term. Also, all the stuff we do in PR generally and in internal communications specifically sometimes has interference or at least interfering elements from other communication functions. There's other stuff going on out there, and trying to isolate what it is we do, particularly on a tactical level, can be very difficult. The other thing is that we're all using different metrics to measure success, and that was one of the reasons why it is we tried to get to the point where we go into standards. So if we head on to the next slide, we start getting into the meat of this presentation. And that is, I'm going to introduce you to this concept that I call the 3 outs plus, the 3 outs plus. And this is merely a typology to start to think about the different things that we do in internal comm activity. And in this case, what you see under here are mainly what we call external communication sort of items. But this is a concept that leads us from business impact, and by that we mean sales and leads and revenue and all the rest of that stuff, recruitment, retention, even reputational sort of measures can fall into this category depending on the organization. And then we have sort of the communication outcomes that are going to relate to that business impact, and you see those represented here. Once again, this is you'll get another version of this slide that's got the standards worked into it here a little bit later on. But conceptually, we're going to move from business impact through communication outcomes, and then the intermediate step or the tactical result of our communication outputs as under outtakes, and then finally the outputs themselves, the activities that we undertake, the stuff that we do. Sometimes organizations can be in an SOS sort of strategy where they're sending out stuff, and that's how they're being measured. How many things did we post? How many releases did we expend? How many people used the manager's meeting kit? Whatever it is. And what I'm submitting to you is that it's perfectly valid to measure at that output level, but you have to go deeper. And I'm going to discuss with you exactly how it is you do that. But the concept, the frame that we're going to be in for this is this concept of outputs, outtakes, outcomes, and business impact. And there is a little bit of overlap in the outs, in those 3 outs. And you can argue, and people have argued with me personally, but never that personally, more face-to-face sort of discussion about exactly what category, what element should be in. But the idea of it is that we got to have some sort of means of determining at which part of the communication mix we are affecting and measuring. So we'll go on to the next slide, and in this one, I'm going to submit to you that the basics of measurement are that you research first, you measure during, and then you evaluate afterward. And if any of you have gone through accreditation processes, IABC, PRSA, CPRS, any of those that have accreditation programs, then there's always some sort of idea that you're going to do the research first, you're going to establish your objectives, you're going to decide on the individual tactics and plans, and then you're going to evaluate afterward. And so what we're doing in the overall measurement mix is we are seeking to improve our strategies and our execution, not so much to prove our value. We all want to prove our value, but that's where you get to key performance indicators. That's where you get to have good objectives. That's where you get the connection to business impact and the agreement between the communication function and the executive function of what's going to constitute success. So keep in mind this measure to improve, not to prove. It's not so much about proving your value. It's about making sure that you're hitting key performance indicators that relate to your overall business objectives. So when we try to create standards on our next slide, what we're talking about doing is like actually determine what you should measure. And so according to David Michelson and Don Stacks in 2011 in their piece, this is the definition of a standard. So we're not so much looking at how, that's the best practice. Instead, what we're looking at is the what. What is it that we should be measuring? And that's really what the focus of the standard project was. It wasn't, to try and make it so that you would know how many questions to ask on a survey, or even, how many different ways you had to ask a question on a survey. There's tons out there that will help you in that respect. But we wanted to get to the nitty gritty about what it is we should do. And why did we think this was such a good idea? Well, on our next slide, we talk about why it is we thought it was important. I mean, not the least of it was that media relations folks had gone through a standards project that was very effective. Marianne Eisenman, David Geddes, and Julie O'Neill, put together a terrific paper and presentation on that. The investor relations folks, Alex Laskin from Quinnipiac University, did a big project on investor relations standards. And then the social media side had a 2 or 3 year program that involved the Word of Mouth Management Association, and a bunch of other people. And it was evident that there was an appetite from the practice, from people like you, that you wanted to have standards too. And so we took it on. We sat on the Measurement Commission, and somebody said, if only there was somebody on the Measurement Commission who had experience leading internal communication. And next thing you know, somebody had grabbed my arm and raised it. I don't even know what happened there, but anyway, it's part of developing a profession, and that's why it's so important. Okay, on to the important stuff. So let's start with outputs. Outputs is what we do. Okay, it's the activities. It's the number of stories on a certain topic that are posted to the intranet. At Goodyear, we did an analysis of the past year of stories that we'd posted and discovered that something like 80% of our content was North American focused, when about 60% of our revenue came from outside North America. So that meant we were unbalanced from a strategic standpoint, and we had to make changes to do that. If you use an enterprise social network, ESN, whether it's Slack or Yammer or Jive or any of the rest of them, how many active users do we have? And so do we have a plan to try and expand the number of users? How many people come to the intranet? How many posts are people posting? What's the nature of their of the posts that they're putting on the network? These are the sorts of things that are output focused. And when we go to measure outputs, we want to measure, in essence, sort of counting. So, we count how many stories we have. We look at how many people have come in. We look at the onboard metrics. If you use SharePoint, then make sure that you and your IT folks have made sure to get the metrics packet turned on SharePoint. For some time, I worked on a spin for a large Fortune 50 company a couple of years ago, and initially they did not have the metrics turned on, so we couldn't tell really what any sort of traffic was to it. We can look at the rate of change over the course of time, and we can look at readability. That's helpful in English. There are, in international companies, you may be using several different languages that all have different scales for readability. Flesch Kincaid here for American Standard English. I'm not sure about Canadian English or British English, but there may be readability stuff that you want to do, and those things can be really, really important. So we're answering the question when we measure outputs, what did we do? And if you're not measuring at that level even, then you need to start doing that. I mean, that is how you start. Quick, easy, set targets for yourself based on history, and you're good. So we did not establish any standards for outputs. And we didn't because it was kind of like for us, in looking at the academic and the practice literature, everything that was being written about it, this is kind of table stakes, as they say in poker. It's like, well, this is what you have to do in order to really come to the party. If indeed you're not doing this, then this is how you buy in to get to that table. At the very least, you do this. So what we want to do is we want to do outtakes, and outtakes are the immediate result of our outputs, and you can see them reflected here momentarily. And this is whether people received, paid attention to, comprehended, or retained the messages that we sent them. And that's where we get these 5 things: awareness, knowledge, understanding, relevance, and retention of information. So now we're going past just the initial measurement of exactly what might be happening, and instead we're getting directly into what the immediate impact of that is on people. We can go to the audience and ask them, and people can talk about survey fatigue, but really what they're fatigued by is not a survey. What they're fatigued by is nothing happening as a result of it. So there's nothing wrong with going to the audience and asking. And as a matter of fact, we sometimes feel like we've got to ask every single person in our organization when all we really need to do is do a statistically significant sample. They do that all the time. And for the most part, it's extremely accurate. We're not dealing with very fine differences of opinion here. So, why not go ahead and do some sampling and use different groups at different times and use those as representative of your group. You can use visits and views. What is it that is being accessed on your intranet, and how frequently or how infrequently. Once again, at Goodyear, we started out with maybe 3,000 visitors per day to our intranet in a universe where we had about 10 times as many who had access to it. And so one of the things we did initially is said, we want to get that count up. And so we came up with strategies that were directly designed to try and drive traffic, including things like using email newsletters. Yes, it's an old company and it took a while to get there. But the point is that visits and views were really, really good. If we have an enterprise social network, we can use the vanity metrics like shares and comments and see to what extent things are being engaged, and we can do campaigns and strategies to try and improve that. We can look at what people comment about, which is really cool. You get into a content analysis of what's being discussed, and you can use that to create campaigns around different pieces of subject matter. This is really helpful when there's been something somewhat controversial, because then you can see, what are people searching for? What are people getting into? And then finally, probably the best thing is old-fashioned ethnography, actually observing what people do. And in the online space, it's gotten easier than ever to be able to understand where people go and what they search for and what they do. Now, mind you, when we measure at this level, we're not at ROI yet. We're not there yet. We certainly can establish some concept of value as a result, but we're not to the point where we can claim it's ROI. So the natural question is, if we've got the outtakes covered, then what about the outcomes? And we can refer to these through a number of different definitions, but the one we settled on is evidence of changes to or reinforcement of opinions, attitudes, or behaviors. And so this is where the rubber begins to meet the road in what we refer to as the traditional internal communication measurement model. This is where your engagement survey comes in. This is where Linda Hahn and Jim Grunig paper on relationship management theory comes in, where you're trying to ascertain the impact of what it is you do. And I love the outcome standards, because they are things that are dependent on a number of different variables. There's a whole bunch of things that go into these individual pieces, and that's okay. What we want to do is make sure that our programming and our content and the way we counsel our organizations is geared toward improving these things, because we know that these things are the antecedents, the predecessors for the stuff that really affects people, as you'll see in just a moment. So there are a lot of them, and the reason there are a lot of them is when we did this research, we talked with probably, I want to say, about 600 people, and there was very little agreement among these people, let alone even the group that we did our study with, our Delphi study with. There was very little agreement on what really should be taken out or what should be combined. And so the next phase of the research has intended to start to get at, whether these things should be combined, rank order these things and make them more effective, et cetera. The things that are in red were the things that were mentioned most often in our Delphi panel. And attitude, advocacy, empowerment, and trust. And those were the things that these people said. Now, once again, people of goodwill can have differences of opinion, right? They can say, gee, it seems like, attitude and empowerment would like precede trust, that they'd be part of trust. Well, they may be. That's not how it is our panel saw it. So we want to test these things and really get to it. The others that are on here, things like discretionary effort. I mean, that's a behavior. And the sense of fairness, which is a simplified way of talking about control mutuality. You know, the idea that the organization is fair with me and gives me equal weight, and I'm willing to give over a certain amount of power and responsibility to my organization because I know that it's going to be okay. Collaboration and teamwork. You know, collaboration occurs across departments. Teamwork occurs within departments, and the literature were pretty clear on the difference between the two, and so they're both here. So if you're looking for sort of the guiding light of how to really activate your internal communication programming, measure people on these things, and then create strategy that drives these. This is what should give you higher performance. It should happen. And we base that once again on the review of, I don't know, about 60 different scholarly articles and probably another 50 or so that are from the practice. So, these are the things that are going to get people to stay with your company. These are the things that are going to get them to recruit their friends. These are the things that are going to make them take discretionary effort, as we said at Goodyear, to build that one more tire and not give up. This is the stuff that gets people going and is exciting for them and gives them that sense of engagement. And you'll notice, speaking of the E word, engagement, you'll notice it's not here. And it's not here because we believe and it's an assertion for sure, we believe that the things that are contained here, if measured, give you a better idea of what it is you need to do to fix it than just having a single number for engagement. We went through, at one of the companies I worked for, we went through the Gallup engagement survey, and that's the Q12. And it asks all kinds of questions that seem sort of tangential to the things that you see here, that maybe are reflections of what you see here, but not precisely. The problem is if you had a department where the engagement score was low, you didn't really know what it was that needed to happen in order to make it better. And so we really took that to heart, and our panel agreed with this idea that it would be much better to measure against these things, attitude, advocacy, empowerment, and trust, than know what it is we have to do in order to fix it than to just have one metric. So on to measuring the outcome. So how do we do that? And unfortunately, I'm going to use the S word again, surveys. We can do surveys and we can get at what people think. Angela Sinicus is fond of saying the only way that you can find out what people think is to survey them and ask them. And that's right. I think that's probably 99% right. The 1% is you can observe their behavior, and their behavior will give you some insight as to what it is that they are thinking. However, if you want to have some sort of comparative nature, then yeah, you got to do that. You can use interviews and focus groups, and yes, you're not going to be able to extrapolate to the wider universe. You're not going to be able to draw quantitative conclusions from qualitative work, but it still can give you a lot of information about what's working and what's not working. It still can be extremely valuable to you as you're planning and executing your communication strategies. You also can use what I call self-administered diaries. You can give people logs. We've done this at 3 different organizations where we pass out a little bound booklet and we ask people to sort of react in real time to what it is that they see and what it is they read and how they feel on an ongoing basis about the organization. And then we take those, and they're anonymized. We take those things and we transcribe the notes and then do a theme analysis to see what's in them. This can be extremely valuable. One of the basic building blocks of this is called the blocks of work strategy, where you try to figure out how much time people are spending on what tasks. And I don't know whether any of you have gotten into sort of the agile movement, but the agile movement is designed to try and take waste out of repeatable processes and give more information to people about how it is that the actual work is being conducted and how you can take time out and make people more efficient. Well, the start of that is understanding what the heck they're doing, and a self-administered diary can do that. You also can look at behavior, and you can do that online, get into network analysis and find out what the flow of information is, who are information nodes, people who are intensifying messaging, and who are information sinks. And that can be extremely helpful in understanding how information makes it through your organization. You also can do things like ask for exit survey data. Go to HR and say, you know what, people who have left, we'd like to do a content analysis of the comments that they make when they're going out the door, and get an idea of what it is that is keeping them from staying, so that then we can begin to make some communications around what the value proposition is internally for us. And you can do the same thing with live excuse me, performance evaluations if you're among the companies that are still doing them. And yeah, there's this whole anonymity thing and like all that. Well, you know what? HR has a way to be able to deliver those things so that people won't know, who is whom, and that's okay. But if you're going to measure the things that we talked about, attitude, advocacy, the perception of authenticity, whether people feel empowered or not, then this is a treasure trove of information, and these data should be made available so that we can analyze it and act upon it. We're still not to ROI. And this is usually when the air in the room, everybody kind of goes, yeah, I know. Everybody wants a formula, right? They want some sort of secret formula they can use, or a button they can press, or some software that will do everything for it. And as good as Sparrow's software is, it's not there yet. It may be there sometime, but it's not there. It's not there yet. So just a little more insight on this on the next slide. One of our respondents had this this quote, and yes, I agree wholeheartedly. You want to feel confident that you can work well with other people in across teams and within teams. And so the bulk of people said trust is like the essential thing. And so I asked myself, why are we not measuring trust more effectively in organizations? If we were to boil all of this down, then I might say, even though my research colleagues would like murder me, I would say measure trust and measure the things that contribute the most to trust, and experiment and figure out what those things are. After trust, the things that were mentioned most often were advocacy, attitude, and empowerment. So all of these things are related, right? I mean, I think once we get to test these things out more effectively, all of these things are going to wind up being related to one another and correlated very strongly with each other. And so if we measure them, we're going to get really, really close to measuring what it is we need to do. So then we talk organizational impact. This is where we actually get to be able to start to calculate ROI in some fashion. And the reason we can do that is that the balanced scorecard, which some of you may be familiar with, which is a means of sort of assessing the different inputs and outputs that lead to organizational performance on the grand scale, on the global scale. Those things very often are including stuff like reputation, things like employee retention rates. They're going to the softer things and like trying to determine through a statistical process similar to marketing mix modeling to what extent those things actually contribute to the bottom line. And since our friends in risk management, our friends in finance, our friends in organizational performance are doing this work, we might have an opportunity to be able to partner with them to see how communication is influencing these things as well. And in our discussions and among our panelists, these were the 6 things that the organizational impact standards that they recommended: productivity, innovation, continuous improvement, reputation, employee retention, and safety. I was really surprised that quality wasn't on this list. That was one of the things that was offered. Because, once again, I have at least some background in manufacturing, and nearly every manufacturing leader I've talked about says that quality, safety, and productivity are the 3 most important metrics that you can have. So I'm surprised that it's not in there, but be that as it may, this is what it is that our research told us. So when we look at those things, we know that there are many, many things that contribute, and it can be really hard to isolate any one thing. For the most part, and I worked closely with 3 CEOs and worked at least tangentially with 2 others, nobody there said, I need to know precisely what the dollar impact on our bottom line is of the activity that you're doing as the internal communication leader. Nobody said that. Instead, they said things like, I know internal communication is important. I just want to know that the strategy that you're pursuing is going to have impact on our organization. And so the more that we can draw this conclusion that the stuff we're doing is improving productivity, that's helping us be more innovative, that's helping us improve our processes over time, that we're building a good reputation, that we're retaining the employees we want to retain, and we're creating a safe environment for our people, the more that that is true, the more we are seen not only as people with a seat at the table, but leaders who belong at that table. And so how do you measure organizational impact? That's on our next slide. There are several different ways, including the economic analysis. That's going back to HR and risk and finance and making friends with those people who do that sort of analysis for a living. There's peer evaluation, comparing yourself to others. So how effectively are other organizations in your industry doing what they do? When I was at National City Corporation, which is now part of PNC out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I did a peer evaluation of internal communication against about 10 of our peer banks. So we looked and said, what's the basic range of budget that's being spent? What are the expectations that the organization has for key performance indicators, and how effectively or ineffectively do those leaders see the communication team operating? You can go back to our friends, the surveys, and ask people about these things. You can use the rest of the things that are on here. A word about independent research studies. Your local neighborhood college communication department and marketing department, they are starving for case studies and data, and they come pretty cheap. I mean, we're talking like a lot less than, I'm pretty cheap, well, I'm not cheap. I'm not easy either, but I come pretty inexpensively, but a lot of times your local prof is just an incredible source that's terribly underused, that can do really, really great work for you. When I was at Kent State, my qualitative research class partnered with a not-for-profit in our area, and we actually did a brand study for them, including ethnographies and depth interviews and all kinds of stuff. So that can be had very, very cheaply. So on to our next slide, and we come back to our old friend, the 3 outs plus. And now we talk about outputs. There are no standards for outputs, but there are activities, and here are examples of things you can measure at that level. Here we have the outtakes, awareness, knowledge, understanding, etc., that are the intermediate step. The communication outcomes, the things that we're trying to influence the most, and then finally the business impact. And this represents, at least the outtake, outcome, and business impact, these represents the 22 standards that have been established by the research. This should be what it is you use to be able to create not only your measurement plan, but your strategy. This should be what guides you, what leads you, because these are solid objectives. You might call them goals, other people call them objectives, but they're how it is you get to SMART objectives. So let's pick on outcomes, for example. Let's look at empowerment. What would we do in order to be able to help build empowerment in the organization? Some of it is communicating with people. In other cases, it's going to be engaging with them and drawing them into a process to allow them to contribute. What do you think the impact of increased empowerment would be, for example, on innovation? I mean, we know that our people are the repository of brilliance in our organization. We don't live without our people. So if we want more innovation, then let's get more empowerment going. Let's make sure that if we want employee retention, that we're affecting trust and the sense of fairness and the sense of advocacy, et cetera. So what I'm suggesting to you is that if indeed one of the deficits, one of the reasons why it is that we haven't done measurement the way we could, is that we've been missing what it is we should be measuring, then this is going to answer that question for you. So from an applied standpoint, how it is you apply this, I'll teach you a tool on the next page here called the AMMO process, AMMO, and that stands for audiences, messages, methods, objectives. And the way you work on it is you audiences first, and then you do objectives, and then you do your message framework, and then finally decide how you're going to do it. And what this enables you to do is start to build in the standards into your planning strategy. And you just click that one more time, Laura, if you please. You're gonna look at your audiences through the prism of priority, level of involvement, sense of urgency. You're gonna measure your objectives looking at your SMART criteria. I believe goals are general and objectives are more specific. And this is where you're gonna bring the standards in. Given the audience we have, what is it that we need them to think, feel, or do? What is it that we have to measure? What data do we have now that we can use as a baseline? Because you need a benchmark, you need a target, you need a time frame. You go ahead and use specifically you use the standards as you assemble your objectives, and that's when you start doing the other creative stuff, getting your messages together and deciding on your methods. And there's actually a separate webinar replay that's on our website, truedigitalcom.com/AMMO, that you're welcome to listen to, that goes into a bit more detail on the process itself. But this is how it is that you tie your strategy into the standards. Like, look at the strategic process, and when you get to objective settings by audience, that's when you decide which of the standards you're going to plug in. So almost to the end of my part of this puzzle, one more slide here, and that is where do you want to start? I'm sorry, maybe that's the next slide. It's a little out of order there, my apologies. Start with measurable objectives. What do you need people to think, feel, or do? Who are these people and what do you need them to do? Try to make your objectives as quantifiable as possible. Quantifiable means it could be counted. So that implies an output outtake focus, at least initially in your objectives. And that is perfectly fine because you're setting the stage for being able to do more later on. And then determine which messages, strategies, and tactics you want to use, and then test them over time. Figure out what's going to work the best. And that, my friends, is in 44 minutes, is 2.5 hours of content plus workshop. So I will turn it back over to Laura, and thank you for your time. And then of course we'll take some questions here shortly. Laura.
Fantastic, thank you, Sean. I hope I was an okay pilot there, and I apologize if there were a few mischanged slides, but we did our best. I think we made it through. So I wanted to share with everybody briefly what Sparrow Modern Workplace is and how it really ties into what Sean's been talking about in regards to supporting the IC measurement standards. So I'm going to take you through this pretty briefly. It should take about 5 minutes or so here. I'll try and keep it quick. But Sparrow Modern Workplace was actually designed by DevFacto Technologies here in Edmonton, Alberta. And it's a 3-part ecosystem, and it's combined of an intranet, which is a little bit of a customizable intranet in a box. So it's really simple to implement and also rich in functionality, and it helps to engage your teams without such a hefty price tag as building your own custom intranet. It also includes a mobile app to help connect with your employees who are working at their desks, out in the field, or wherever it is they might be working. And then finally, and this is where it really ties into what Sean's been discussing today, Sparrow has a really great, unique analytics dashboard, and I'll take you through that a little bit more. But it basically helps you to measure those outtakes and outcomes, and then make strategic decisions based on real-time data. So what I wanted to focus on today is the analytics component of Sparrow and highlight how it can help you to measure the IC standards. So Sparrow's analytics are diverse, and they're actually really in-depth. They make it simple to measure outputs and outtakes, and then draw informed conclusions on your data. So by combining these inclusions with these conclusions that are potentially available elsewhere in your organization, Sparrow helps you to draw a detailed understanding of what's going on from a communications perspective. So here's a look at what the actual dashboard looks like. These are a few of the analytics outputs that we can measure. So it actually makes it really simple, as you can see, to read and measure the outputs. So whether you're posting communications from the intranet side or from the Sparrow publishing portal, this platform actually tracks what's important to you, and it makes it really easy to access that information. So in here, a few of the examples of the outputs that we can see are things like author outputs. So you can actually measure and track the number of posts on a particular topic that you shared with your organization in terms of readership. So you can measure what readership has been like per author, per post, per topic potentially. You can also measure things like topic statistics, so number of posts, most viewed posts, most popular authors. And finally, you can measure readership statistics. And I think this is one of the most interesting things. But you can go beyond things like an intranet visitor count that a lot of current intranets do provide, but you can actually understand the readership, particularly on mobile, in regards to how many people have actually read your post and how well have they read it. You can track views by time of day, and you can also actually go through a particular post and see where your readers have started to drop off and what percentage of your readers have read all the way through to the end of a post. So there are a number of outtakes that can be measured, and we recognize that the information that's important to one organization may not be important to all. So the analytics component of the Sparrow Modern Workplace can actually be personalized as well. So here's going a little bit more into the last sort of measurement that I was describing, where you can actually read how far somebody has read through a post. So in this particular example, you can see a post that would have been shared to the intranet and the mobile platform. And as you scroll down to that little yellow bar, you can see that 45% of the readers stopped reading before this mark, and 50% actually made it all the way to the end of the post. So that can potentially indicate the length of post that you should be sharing, maybe where you want to keep things written sort of above the fold on the phone, that type of thing. So you can draw some interesting conclusions from that. And then Sparrow also provides something that we call awareness scoring. So it's a calculated score out of 100 for a post or topic based on the volume and quality of reads over time. So if you have a significant amount of reads and over time people stop reading that post, the awareness will decline, and it might encourage you to repost on a particular topic if you want to keep awareness levels for something like safety gloves up above a certain level. Sparrow Analytics measures outcomes or outputs and outtakes rather, as I've mentioned before. It makes it easy to correlate data with your external systems, such as production, efficiency, or safety metrics. And when we combine it with Sean's IC standards, an analytics tool like this, it's intended specifically for internal communications teams. It can ensure that you really deliver an impact. Sean, I've got one question that's come through, and the question is, why is there no standard for engagement? I think you might have touched on this, but if you maybe want to expand on that.
Excuse me, yes. So we expected to find a standard for engagement. And instead, what we learned was that there was much more interest in the antecedents or the predecessors to engagement, the things like trust, attitude, advocacy, sense of fairness, authenticity, transparency. Those were the things that people said would be most important to measure. We believe that given the opportunity to do some additional testing and some more specific research, perhaps with a single company or two, that we may be able to determine whether we can create an engagement index from these standards and have individual components that would relate overall to one another. So I think I think the reason there is no engagement standard is that the panel that we worked with and the task force that we used, and then as I said, about 600 people at four different conferences that weighed in on all of this stuff, they didn't think it was as big a problem. And I think The other thing I'd mention on that is that, there is no small amount of controversy now about engagement, because engagement now has become a thing. It's been something that you strive for. Oh, we want to increase engagement in our organization. And really, engagement is not a business outcome. It's not, it may have business impact, but it is not a measured impact at this time. Instead, it's means. So that's how we think we ought to tackle the engagement question. Excellent. Yeah, so if we summarize things, you want to know the 3 outs plus. I mean, if there's only one slide that you take away from this, get the second time through with the standards arranged according to the 3 outs plus. Also, I strongly encourage you, if you don't already have, well, even if you do have a strategic planning methodology that you're following in your communication, go to the website and watch the ammo process, truedigitalcomm.com/ammo. Just watch that. It's another 43 minutes of your time, and you'll get a really good view of how it is that tool works. The ammo process came to light because at one of the companies I had, there was a guy in supply chain who needed more help than I could give him. And so I taught him the ammo and had him fill it out. He filled out the audiences, the objectives, the messages, and the methods. And then I gave him advice based on that. And he went off with his team and did the stuff and came back and said it just simplified matters and that he never knew communication could have a process. So know those things. Measure the knowledge, actions, and impact. This is what we're getting at with these standards, is we're getting to where we're just not just talking about measuring at the output level, we're going more deeply. And then when you put together your objectives, think of what your benchmark is, what the target is, what you're trying to reach, and over what period of time. And this very fact will help you win more points with the C-suite. So as I said, a member of the Measurement Commission. Rock on over to instituteforpr.org. You don't even have to register to get any of the research there. There's a research letter that comes out every couple of weeks that you should be getting. It's going to give you cutting edge research across the entire pantheon of public relations. You're welcome to grab my book. My ebook is available there at truedigitalcomm.com/face-to-face. And if you just want to chat, if you just want to get together and toss around some ideas, I always say it doesn't cost anything to be my friend, and I'm always happy to give of myself. So thanks very much for your time and for your attention, and we wish you the best in the future. Laura?
Great. Yeah, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And thank you very much to Sean for joining me on this webinar this morning and this afternoon, wherever people are. So again, feel free to reach out with any questions and keep your eyes peeled for that follow-up email with a link to the recorded version.
Namaste.
Have a great day, guys.
Namaste. Take care, everyone.